That's kind of a depressing title, right? Free, the world's most dangerous price. Well, how about this, to take the edge off? I'm going to offer you today some information, some advice, and some tips that could potentially add up to 5 years to your life. So we're doing better already. But first, take a second with me to consider these friendly, colorful apps. The vast majority of us are familiar with most, if not all of these. We use them every day. But here's something you might not have thought about, at least for a little while. These all have one thing in common. They're all free. And free, which in this context really means that we pay with our attention to advertisements and with our personal privacy instead of money. Free has become the dominant business model of the internet, which is now the dominant lens through which we experience the world. And these companies today are collectively valued at well over $2 trillion. That raises a question. How did free become so valuable? Well, it turns out that people love free stuff. I'm not telling you anything new there, right? But behavioral economists actually have a name for this phenomenon. They call it the zero price effect. And the zero price effect is this crazy powerful and often overlooked dynamic. It was first identified by a guy named Dan Ariely. And Dan Ariely did a series of experiments that involved offering people a choice between Hersheys Kisses and Ferrero Rocher chocolate. And in the first of his experiments, Ariely set the price of a Hershey's Kiss at 2 cents and the price of a Ferrero chocolate at 27 cents. And as we can see, people were fairly evenly split between the two. Well, then Ariely did his experiment a second time, and this time he lowered the price of both by the same amount, 1 cent each. So that now the Hershey's Kiss cost 1 cent and the Ferrero chocolate cost 26 cents, and again we see that people were fairly evenly split between the two. Well, then Ariely did his experiment a third time, and this time he again lowered the price of both by the same amount, 1 cent, only this time the Hershey's Kiss became free, and the Ferrero chocolate still cost a quarter. So what do you think happened? People swarmed to the Hershey's Kisses. They abandoned the Ferrero chocolates. And Ariely hypothesized that this very powerful dynamic is caused because people experience free as a pleasure. So he thought the calculus went something like this. Chocolate equals pleasure, plus free equals more pleasure, so go for the Hershey's Kiss. But it turns out, free is not this powerful because it increases our pleasure. Free is this powerful because it eliminates the pain of payment. So just last year, researchers at Carnegie Mellon set out to understand what happens to people's brains when you first show them a product and you then show them a price next to that product. And there is an area of increased brain activity that results, but it's an area that's associated with pain stimuli. So what Ariely did when he lowered the price of his Hershey's Kisses to free was something more like the following. He caused people to make this calculus. Chocolate equals pleasure, plus free equals no pain, so go for the Hershey's Kiss. And that difference is subtle, but it's huge. Free doesn't work because it increases our pleasure. Free works because it tricks us by disabling the part of our brains that tell us when to stop. And scientists have studied what happens to lab rats, in a different context, food, when you disable the part of the hypothalamus that sends a negative signal, I'm full, stop eating. The rats just eat and eat and eat. Why? Because they perceive what they're doing as all pleasure, no pain, even though that's not true. When we encounter and use free apps, we turn into these rats. We are paying for these with some of the most valuable things that we own, with our time, with our attention, with ourselves, our personal privacy and information. But free tricks us into perceiving this as all pleasure, no pain, even though that's not true. So an economist would call what's happening here a market failure. We are now irrationally over-consuming on a massive scale. The average user now touches, taps, or swipes a smartphone 2,617 times each and every day. The average US resident now spends more than 4 hours a day on a smartphone. And anecdotal evidence bears this out. So my wife and I were very fortunate a couple of years ago to be able to visit China, where her smartphone just absolutely did not work. Nonetheless, she found herself dozens of times a day pulling it out of her pocket and tapping at it uselessly. And we laughed about it at the time. But that's a powerful effect. Free. Free means we can just skim along the shallows of the internet from post to post and from site to site, seeking out those small dopamine hits that feed our ever-growing addiction. And there's never any interruption. There's no pain of payment. There's never a signal to stop. And what happened to those rats? They got lazy. They would no longer work for their food. Instead, they expected it to be delivered to them. And they would only eat hyper-palatable and unhealthy food. But they would eat and eat and eat it. So if that's sounding familiar, it should, because that's the way that we consume the internet today. We expect it to be delivered to us for free. And we gorge and gorge ourselves on hyper-palatable but unhealthy content. We are now the rats. That's a problem. But even worse, I think, is the allocative inefficiency that is the result of this. So this is what venture capital funding looks like in the United States today. We as a society are dumping billions of dollars into developing ever more creative ways to first addict ourselves, then to extract from ourselves as much of our time and attention and personal privacy as possible, and then auction it off to the highest bidder. In short, Silicon Valley has become a giant black hole that is sucking in our financial capital, and worse yet, our human capital. So our best and brightest graduates of our great universities now flock there, each hoping to develop the next Candy Crush saga. That's a human tragedy. Free. Free is the delivery device for the most widely used addictive substances on earth. It is the world's most dangerous price. So we're dealing with a market failure of epic proportions. There are three ways to fix a market failure, and the first is for the government to fix it. So, will the government step in to fix this problem? I was in DC a couple of years ago to give a talk to some congressional policy staffers who were interested in cracking down on tech monopolies. And after the talk, I cornered one of them in the hallway and I asked, given that Google is the most prominent and dominant monopolist of our time, and it has been for quite a while, why haven't we done anything about it? And here we were in the hallways of power in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and he looked me straight in the eyes and he said, Google owns this town. So no, I don't think the government's going to step in and fix this problem. Well, the second way to fix a market failure is for the market to fix itself. So, will companies stop using free to try to turn us into those lab rats? These guys look pretty friendly, right? They're certainly very well educated, with master's degrees and PhDs in things like neuroinformatics and neuroeconomics. Well, they're the founders of a recent startup called Dopamine Labs, whose explicit goal is to make apps even more addictive using neuroscience. That's health science. Their tagline, quote, "At the end of the day, only one thing matters. Your users will crave it, and they'll crave you." So no, I don't think the market's going to fix this problem. And that means it's up to us. So some people would call what I'm about to offer you life hacks. At this point, I call them survival strategies. The first one, uncheck this box. Force yourself to actually sign in to the services that you use each and every day. It will restore a little bit of that pain of payment. Second, now that you have to actually type your password in, change it to a randomly generated string of at least 16 characters, making it difficult to memorize and forcing you to actually reach in your drawer and pull out the Post-it note you've written it down on and transcribe it every time. Again, restoring a little bit of that pain of payment. Third, there are a lot of apps and plugins designed to block unproductive sites when you actually need to use the internet for productive purposes. I use Stay Focused. There are others out there. And as a side note, somewhat ironically, these are all free. So go ahead and take advantage of it where you can. But the problem with all these strategies is that they're all just ways for heroin users to use a little bit less heroin every day. Remember, we're not just dealing with some cute little irrationality here. This is the world's most dangerous price. So the nuclear option, and I think it's the best one, switch back to a dumb phone. Now, you might get made fun of. I certainly do. But consider this. Social media use alone will account for more than 5 years of the average user's life. So ask yourself this question. When I look back on my life, will I want to have spent more than half a decade on Twitter? Of course not. Thank you.